Tonight's encounter comes to you from long ago. We're pulling this one out of the vault. Hi, Nance. I thought long and hard before I sent this in to you. You see, the story isn't mine, as in I am not the one who lived it. But I guess you could say it's my story now, as the person who did live it is long gone, and they left these stories to me, you might say. These stories, were my Grandpa Mort's stories, and he's the one that lived through it. Here's the rundown on my Grandpa Mort. He was actually my great-grandfather. He was born in 1884. The story, or stories, happened between 1907 and 1910, when he was still a young man. I first heard these stories when I was a young boy, in the late 1960s and the 1970s. In 1983, I was 20 years old, and I was already married and expecting my first child to be born later that year. My Grandpa Mort chuckled at the thought of getting to see a great-great-grandchild. I loved that thought. I mean, how many people get the privilege of seeing a second great-grandchild be born? So one night in 1983, while my wife was heavily pregnant and just wanted peace and quiet, I left the house, picked up some beer, and I stopped by my Grandpa Mort's house only a few minutes away from where I lived. And yes, the old man loved him some beer right up to the very last day. We sat outside and we sipped our beer, and like I knew he would, we began to walk down memory lane, and I got to hear all the stories once again, and I loved that. Here is the main body of what he told me. He had gone up to Alberta, Canada as a young man. He had already done the whole go west, young man thing down in the United States, which, I should say, the United States is where he was born, though I don't know exactly where. He never said. He said that he had found that the western United States were already overrun, trapped out, hunted out, gold panned out. It had run out and run over in every way you could think of. Somehow, he heard about Alberta. Someone said all the things he had been looking for were up there just waiting to be found. So he packed up. He headed straight north, and he went to go follow his love of the wilderness and all wild things. While there, he fell in love with the land, the air, the mountains, the people, the sky, the water, everything. He said his first night on Canadian soil that he felt more at home there than he had anywhere else in his whole life, and he knew he would never leave. And to my knowledge, he never again left Canada. He did a lot of different things when he got to Canada. For a while, he worked logging over in British Columbia. He had also done a fair bit of trapping and some gold panning all over between Alberta and British Columbia. But the first time that he ran into what we call a Sasquatch, which he called hairy forest giants, that happened in Alberta. I don't recall him ever saying where the first incident happened exactly. I don't know if he knew where it was exactly, but it was somewhere in the mountains in Alberta. He was in the mountains on his own, and he made camp at an elevation higher than he would have preferred. But he said storms were rolling in, and he did not want to keep moving in a storm. He said the storm turned out to be more of a non-event, and it mostly blew by with just high winds and a few sprinkles. But by that time, it had gotten dark, so he stayed put. He had a fire as there was no rain, but he said he woke up because his horse was pawing, pulling on its tether, snorting, and whinnying. He knew that meant there was likely a predator nearby. So he went out, and he built up the fire outside the tent, and he pulled the horse in closer. He was very fond of that horse. He said it was a real good horse. He had named it Ace because, well, it was a trio of aces that made him win the poker game, which meant he walked away with that horse. So Ace was the name. So he sat up outside, and he kept that fire going, listening for anything to give away its position or to give him a clue as to what it was out there. He didn't smell any predator scent at all, which he said was odd, because by that time he usually could when the wind was moving like that at night. He said predators often smelled really bad. He kept a watch on which way Ace's eyes were pointing and which way the horse kept trying to position itself. He said horses will try to face a predator to keep an eye on it. I have no idea. I have ridden a horse only a few times in my life, and I have never owned one. I don't know what their habits are. But he said that Ace's eyes were wide, and his nostrils were quivering and blowing constantly. Grandpa Mort said he figured that there was something out there circling their camp, but try as he might, he couldn't see it or figure out what it was. This wasn't the first time that he'd encountered something at night that was stalking him or Ace, but he said this stuck out because it was the first time that he had ever felt like something was watching him, something intelligent. He said that was the best way he could say it. This wasn't like just some animal stalking you. This had a different feel to it. It was so different that he forever remembered it. He said once or twice the stories that he had heard while working in British Columbia came to mind to him that night while he sat at the fire. He couldn't say why, just they kept coming up in the back of his mind. It was the tales of the giants that had walked through the forest. He had never believed those stories, but the way things were happening out there, they sounded a bit like what he remembered hearing. It was a restless and sleepless night for both him and Ace. But come morning, they both made tracks out of there with no hesitation. They never did see what it was that had bothered them almost until dawn. But it was so strong that it stayed with him. Even years later, he said he believed that was the first run-in with one of those forest giants. He believed that it was getting his scent, he said. That will make sense later. Later that same year, this would have been about 1908, he was sluicing for gold. He said it was summertime, and he kept moving his location on the river every couple days because if he hadn't found anything, the best thing he could do was move. He was sleeping under a stretched canvas tent. He still had Ace, who stayed right outside his tent. And it happened, the same thing again. He woke up to Ace kicking up a noise. He was outside of the tent right away. First thing he did was check Ace. Then he started stoking the fire that was down low to bring up the embers and get a fire going again. He said he had a very uneasy feeling come over him when he started to stoke up the fire. He thought maybe he was about to have a confrontation with another man or perhaps a group of men. Now, that wasn't uncommon back then, especially along rivers where men were known to be getting gold. Those men, they would kill you, and they would either take the gold they thought you had, or they would take your spot if they thought it was a good spot. So he made a big show of looking all around, told Ace to stop being all jumpy over nothing, then quickly went back into his tent like he thought nothing was wrong, just in case they were watching. But then he rolled to the back edge of the tent, lifted up the edge, and crawled out where it was dark. He stayed there in the dark, thinking maybe he could spot whoever it was before they made their move on him. He heard Ace still pawing, snorting, and making small noises, so he knew that whoever it was, they were still around somewhere. I asked him, how did he know that it wasn't a bear or some other dangerous animal? He just said that when you're out there like that for a long time, you just get to knowing things when you feel them or when you smell them. He waited a while, and he saw a person moving, coming out of the shadows of the trees, slowly getting closer and closer to Ace, who was becoming very agitated. But it was a really big person. A really big person. He was already pretty spooked, but he said that he trusted Ace, who had started to really kick up a big fit. And he said that if Ace was this spooked by this person, no matter what size they were, they had to be really bad. As soon as that person stepped close enough to be shown in the firelight, Grandpa Mort said he about crapped his trousers. He was looking at what he knew was one of the forest giants that he had heard them talk about over in British Columbia. He knew it right away, he said. He said it was smart. He could tell. It had slowly stepped forward and gauged just where it could come up to before stopping, or just out of reach of Ace's hooves when he would rear up and paw the air and come back down. It stood there and it looked around very carefully, he said. At one point, he thought it was sniffing the air while it turned its body and looked all around the camp. It seemed very deliberate with what it was doing, like it knew that Grandpa Mort could be nearby and could cause it some trouble. The big forest giant stepped to one side of where Ace was. Now it had a straight shot of looking at the tent. It squatted down like it could see into the tent, which Grandpa said it couldn't. But the low firelight right down there glowed up at it, and he could see it was sniffing the air. Grandpa Mort said when he saw that, he shuddered. He couldn't say why at the time, but it made him shudder. That thing was sniffing the air down low, the air coming from the tent's direction. It seemed puzzled, he said. Then it stood back up, and it stared at the tent for 2 or 3 seconds more. Then it focused on Ace again. That's when Grandpa Mort knew it wanted Ace. One time, a First Nations man, I think he said the man was Cree, well, that man had once told a story in a town that Grandpa Mort had stopped in. He said he was in a public house having a drink, trying to get into a card game, when he overheard this man who was not allowed inside the public house at the time. Well, this man was standing right outside, and he was telling a story to another man. The man said that one of the hairy forest giants had attacked his horse, broke its neck, then ripped it in half and walked away with the back end of the horse. The man said he tried to save the horse, but the giant had crept in at night, stole his gun, broke it, and he would not be driven off when the man woke up. No one believed that man. Now that story came to mind when Grandpa Mort saw what was making Ace so upset. And unlike that Cree man, Grandpa Mort had his rifle in his hand. He couldn't shoot right at the giant because Ace was dancing around nervously, and he kept crossing back and forth right where he would have to shoot to hit the giant. So Grandpa Mort stood up and walked right around the tent to let that giant see him. He was hoping it would spook off. It looked his way for a long second, like it didn't care that he was there. Then it moved to keep Ace between him and Grandpa Mort. Now right away, 2 things became clear to Grandpa Mort. It was not afraid of him, and it was also a thinking and reasoning thing. Because it wanted the horse, yes, but it knew enough to keep the horse between him and Grandpa Mort. That meant it knew what a rifle was, or it wouldn't have bothered to keep the horse between them, because it was no contest in just size and strength if it came to a fight between the 2 of them. That scared Grandpa Mort. This was not some dumb animal he was facing. Now, every time that Grandpa Mort told me this story when I was a kid, I was always on the edge of my seat. I was asking, "What'd you do? What happened next?" And every time, Grandpa Mort would draw out the telling, making me nervous and jumpy. I loved it and hated it all at once. I knew where the story was going to go, but I still loved to hear him tell it. I'm not going to do that to you, though. So here's what happened. He reached forward and grabbed Ace's reins with his left hand, stepped to his side of Ace's broadside body, put his rifle over Ace's back, and pointed it at the forest giant. Ace was still stepping and moving around, but Grandpa said he was able to keep the rifle up and clear of him. He said the forest giant took one long look at that rifle, and then he knew he was right. That giant knew what a rifle was, because its face changed from being passive and contemplative to angry. He said its face got bunched up, then the mouth opened to let out a howling scream that was louder than any bear's roar and echoed farther up and down than any elk bugle he had ever heard. Ace heard that sound and reared up, almost knocking Grandpa Mort to the ground. But he managed to steady himself, and when Ace came down on all four hooves again, he looked over the horse's back, but he could not see the forest giant. It had fled. Grandpa Mort said he made up a great big fire and sat up all night. But Ace was calmed down within a few minutes, which meant the giant was probably gone, but he wasn't going to take any chances. They did not see it again that night. He said he spent the whole night trying to remember anything and everything that he had ever heard about forest giants. The next trip into town for supplies, he deliberately lingered and tried to listen to all the talk, but the subject of the forest giants did not come up, which irritated him to no end because every other time before, when he didn't care at all about the topic, it seemed to be mentioned at some point on every trip into town. Now that he wanted to hear the information or find a way to ask about it, no one was talking. He eventually found another First Nations man just outside of town who was selling this and that, all kinds of things on a blanket that he had spread out near the trail's road. He bought some buttons from the man. He really didn't need them. He said it was just a way to start talking to him. Eventually, he found a way to get on to the topic of the forest giants, and the First Nations man said, yes, they do like horse meat, and they would take a horse if they could. He proceeded to ask the man many questions, and the man answered a few of them. Then he looked at Grandpa Mort and he said, you have met with one. Grandpa Mort said yes, he had, and he briefly told him the story. The man told Grandpa Mort to always trust his horse, which Grandpa Mort already knew to do that. But the next things the man said, he did not know. The man told him they do not like burning cedar, and to always throw cedar branches on the fire at night. That sounded odd to him, but he put it away in his memory. The man also told him that if he finds many of them living where he is, in his area, and he wants rid of them, to feed them anything made from flour, because it is not a food they have eaten in their history. It will bind up their insides, and they will slowly die. That was another odd-sounding thing, but Grandpa said he remembered it, just in case. I asked him if he had ever done that. Did he feed them things made of flour deliberately? And he said no, never intentionally, though he had food things that disappeared a few times, but he admitted that anything could have taken them. And he said that in those days, he hardly ever had real flour, and that he was usually lucky to have some buckwheat flour. Real flour was just too expensive for a man like him. The other things he said that the First Nations man told him was to never, ever trust them, and that they worked often like a pack of wolves. One would make eye contact with you. That's the one trying to keep your attention, while the others are moving in closer to attack. He said they are always violent, though at first they will seem friendly. They are known to be takers of men, women, children, horses, livestock, dogs, and anything they can take. He said one thing to know and understand about them is they are known to eat their prey before killing them. Grandpa Mort said, what does that mean? He said they will eat their prey, and they will eat it alive. They do not kill it first. They will find the animal or the human, break legs or arms, whatever they must to disable it. Then they start eating their prey alive. Their victim dies from blood loss and shock, typically not a broken neck. They will sometimes kill very large animals, only because it is harder for them to hold down and control while they eat it alive. Things large like a cow or a horse. Then they will try to snap its neck. The more he talked and the more he listened to that man, the more Grandpa Mort said he shuddered when he remembered that night that the thing came into his camp. Then the next thing that the Cree man told my grandpa scared him very, very badly. The First Nations man said that sometimes, once they get the scent of a particular man, if they are successful at getting something from that man, whether it's food, an animal, or a shiny object, or if that man has something they want to take, they will keep that man's scent and they will follow him to the ends of the earth. Grandpa Mort was thinking maybe he should sell Ace, though he really didn't want to. He didn't want them coming back, though. So he asked the man, would they bother with a man if he had no horse or much at all to take? Would he follow them then? He said the man looked at him for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he simply said, sometimes they just want the man. Grandpa was taken aback. He asked, what does that mean? Are you saying they want to kidnap or eat him or what? But the man was done talking. He began picking up all the things off his blanket, rolled them up, and put it all on the horse's back. Then he was gone. Grandpa Mort said that when he next went back to the river to sluice for more gold, he did not enjoy it as he had before. He found that he was always looking up into the trees behind him all around, and at night he was only half sleeping. He made sure to keep Ace very close, and the thought that he himself might be what smelled good to one of those beasts, that unnerved him. And while he didn't say it, I gathered not much unnerved him in his younger days. But nothing happened for a while, and he went on with his days looking for gold. Sadly, he had to put Ace out of his pain one day later that autumn. He was leading him down a rocky incline. He said the going was steep, and there was no other way except to go back a very long way to double back around another way. So he got off, and he was leading Ace on foot. But somehow, Ace lost his footing on the rocks. He started sliding, and he almost took Grandpa Mort down with him, but he managed to get out of the way just in time before the horse barreled him down. But he couldn't stop what happened. Ace had gone down sliding, and then was down on his belly. And when that happened, Grandpa Mort said he heard the scream, and at the same time, he heard the leg snap. Yes, Ace had broken a front leg when he went down. A rifle shot later, and he had to send Ace on to the sweetest pastures that all good horses go to. Now, I'd heard that story many, many times, and each time my old tough Grandpa Mort would tear up while telling it. He said it was only one of 2 times in his whole life that he had to kill an animal that was neither about to attack him, nor was it about to be his dinner. And for the record, he never got over either of them. Now, things were much harder for Grandpa Mort not having a horse. He could not afford to get another horse right away either, but he did, however, manage to get a mule between a little bit of bartering, some work, and some cash he had saved up. She was a spotted Molly mare named Missy. Missy was a tough mule, he said, and she didn't brook any nonsense from other people or other creatures that they happened to meet on their travels. He said she could be mean as a snake, and she was the epitome of being mule stubborn. But within a couple months, she was right sweet to him, but no one else, he said. And sure enough, there came the day they ran into those big forest giants again. I asked him, was it the same one? Did it follow his scent? Grandpa Mort said that he didn't really know, but something about how he said it made me think he believed it was. This occurred along the Athabasca River. He had moved further in several times into the river area. He had found a few traces of gold, but not enough to get excited about. Now, in his experience, he said, it was best to keep going upriver when you found a trace of gold. You tend to find the bigger deposits that way. So he was moving upriver. They were following the river, he said. Missy was packed heavy, so he was walking and leading her on foot. They often had to go into the timberline to follow the river, because the river banks were sometimes unwalkable, and other times they would climb up and suddenly be overlooking the river by many feet. He said it was late in the morning by the look of the sun. It was summer again, and the day was fine and blue. Missy suddenly stopped walking and would not budge. He tugged on the lead, but she made it clear she was not moving. She actually took a few steps backwards. Her ears suddenly laid back. Her nostrils were fluttering. He thought they were about to walk up on a bear or something else semi-dangerous. So he walked around and pulled his rifle out of the pack and got ready just in case. Then Missy suddenly backed up even further and turned, and when she did, she almost hit him with her head as she swung around. She was now backed up with her rear to the river, and she was looking directly at the trees. He said Missy didn't usually make hardly any sound at all, not at all like the horses he had had, but she scared him good right then because she let loose a braying, whinny sound that he had never heard from her. Her eyes were large, and her nostrils were working hard to breathe. She had the scent of something, and in the many months that he had had her, she had never been like this, not even when they literally almost walked right into a big brown bear. He kept trying to put her with her broadside facing the trees so he could stand on the other broadside of her and use her to steady the rifle. He explained that it was something they always did back then, not about steadying the rifle, but for another reason. If it was a human out there, more than likely than not, they wanted what you had, and more likely than not, that something they wanted included your horse or pack animal, so they didn't usually want to risk shooting it. So if you stood on the other side of your animal, it made it harder for them to shoot you. And as he had not hurt a horse at all, he assumed if it's a human out there, they were on foot, and they would very much like to take Missy as a prize. But no, it was not a man. It was a large male forest giant, or as we know them, a Sasquatch. He came right out to the last tree before the open river bank. He made sure that Grandpa Mort saw him, but he kept most of himself hidden behind a tree. He said this was the first time that he had ever gotten a daylight look at one of them, and he said they were a fearsome thing to look at. Timber tall, he said. He never gave me a measurement on how tall he thought they were. He just said they were timber tall. Black, thick hair everywhere he could see, he said. And they always had an angry face, large eyes, muscular jaws that jutted forward. I looked at Grandpa Mort and I said, "You must have been very close to see that." He stopped and he said, "Yes, too close." It was giving him a very hard stare. He suddenly remembered what the old First Nations man outside of town had told him. One will keep your attention while the others circle to attack. Realizing that, he immediately broke eye contact with the big male. It took a second for his eyes to readjust, but he was able to look around through the dark timbers, and to his shock he saw two more large, dark shapes there. As soon as he looked away, the big male started to make a vocal sound. I asked him what kind of sound, and he said he couldn't describe it. It was not human. It was like a talking screech sound. He said he didn't know if the male was trying to get his attention so he would look back at him, or if he was telling the other two the jig was up. Suddenly, a clump of dirt, or some kind of plant with dirt still attached to it, hit Grandpa Mort on the side of his face, and now he had dirt in his eyes. So, they played dirty. He was shaking off the dirt and trying to clear his eyes when Missy started kicking up and dancing around, and ended up knocking him and his rifle into the river. He hit the water and he lost the grip on his rifle. The current was already moving him off from the bank by the time he got his head above the water. Missy now had 3 of them around her. She was turning, kicking, and braying. He said, "Did you know mules kick sideways?" I said, "No." He said, "Yes. She was kicking and bucking, and she was kicking sideways." One of them, the big male, had gotten his arms around her neck, while the other 2 were trying to grab her kicking back legs. Grandpa Mort caught some of the brush that had gotten caught up around the riverbank, sticking out into the water. He used it to pull himself closer to the bank and then pulled himself out of the river. There were a lot of rocks there at the river bank, and he started to pick up as many big ones as he could carry as he ran towards Missy and the 3 of those forest giants that had her surrounded. He was throwing rocks the whole way as he ran. He said he didn't have a plan as to what he would do. He had no gun. He didn't know what he was going to do when he got close to Missy and the giants. But he was running, and he was picking up rocks while he was running, and he kept throwing with all the strength he had. Then suddenly he was close enough that he actually hit one. He caught it on the side of its head. It didn't hurt it, he didn't think, but it made him turn and look at him. With its head turning to look at my Grandpa Mort, it did not see the next kick that came from Missy, who was making a terrible noise the entire time, turning and desperately trying to kick and shake her attackers loose. The back one, the one who had turned to look at Grandpa Mort, they took that vicious kick right to the side of its face. He said it was a female, and not as large as the male that was trying to close in on Missy's neck. When that back hind leg caught her, he was sure it at least broke her jaw. He said he wouldn't have been surprised if it had killed her. She went down immediately. The other hairy giant that was by her at the hindquarter let out a weird kind of howl and dropped to the female on the ground to check on her, I guess. The male saw what was happening, and he let go of Missy, who immediately took off like a streak. He said he could see blood all over the riverbank where Missy had been, and his heart sank. But as he came to a stop from running, he now realized that he was in a really bad spot. He was very close to those forest giants. Missy was gone. All his supplies were gone. He had lost his rifle in the river. He had no weapons other than rocks. And now a very angry one of those forest giants was standing up, looking at him, and it started running towards him. Grandpa Mort said he did the only thing he knew to do. He jumped right back in the river, and he started swimming as fast as he could. His heart sank, he said, when he heard a big splash behind him. He looked back, and he was right. The big male had come in right after him. He just knew he was going to meet his maker that very day. He kept swimming. Then he was hearing the howling from the riverbank where the injured one was. He looked back now, just to check how close the male was to him, and to his surprise, he saw that the male was getting back out of the river and was going back to the other 2 on the river bank. Now previously, Grandpa always stopped telling the story right there. Then he would talk about how scared and how thankful he was that he was alive. I always would ask him, "What about Missy? Did you find Missy?" When I was younger, he always said, "Nope, I'm sorry, I never found her. I bet somebody found her and made a good mule out of her." But he never looked me in the eye when he said it. So that very last time, there I am, 20 years old, about to become a father for the first time, and there he was, 99 years old, expectantly looking forward to his second great-grandchild. I asked him again between sips of beer. And I guess he thought it was okay for me to hear the truth now. He slowly said, "Yes, he found Missy later that afternoon. He had waited until the creatures left. They carried the injured one out. He followed the blood along the banks, through the trees, and he found her quite a ways away. He no longer had his rifle, but he did have a large knife that he used for skinning animals. It was still in the pack that was still tied to Missy. He found her. She was lying down, her sides heaving. She lifted her head when she heard him, and she tried to get up, but she couldn't. He looked her over, and he saw there were huge chunks missing from her rump, on her face, and on her neck. There were bite marks all over her nose and her face. He said it looked like most of her nose had been bitten off. He cried, and he said he apologized to her, cried some more, got his skinning knife out of the pack, and slit her throat. She was almost gone from blood loss anyway, he said. He just wanted to help her along, to ease it for her, no more suffering. He said that he stood up, and he told the trees all around him that she was the best darn mule Alberta had ever seen. And at 99 years old, he looked over at me and he said he believed that was still true. Now, while all this was happening, he thought the male was trying to break her neck, but no, he had been taking chunks off her. There's at least one other animal out there in the world that does that. I mean, eat its prey alive without necessarily killing them first, and that's a hyena. People think hyenas are hated because they're scavengers, but no. Talk to the African tribesmen. They'll tell you. They hate them because they are known to eat their prey alive until it dies of shock and blood loss. Just like that man had told Grandpa Mort, the forest giants are known to do. After that, Grandpa Mort said that he spent almost a week going on foot to get back to a town. He wasn't able to carry much off of Missy, and he left her and the pack and everything there. He made sure to take that knife, his hatchet, and what little food he could carry on his own. He got out of the mountains for a while, and he gave up gold prospecting for good. For a while, he said he wandered around. He worked on some logging crews, and then he said he met and married the prettiest woman Alberta had ever seen in 1912. And he said, at 99 years old, he believed that was still true. I never knew my great-grandmother. She died in childbirth with her sixth child in 1921, who was my grandmother, who in turn gave birth to my mother during the Second World War. Grandpa Mort raised those kids himself, and he never remarried. It ended up that he sadly outlived all of his children but one, and he outlived one of his grandchildren that died in an accident. I guess you could say he really lived the width and the breadth of life, and he saw an awful lot in his time. My best memories are sitting with him, inside or outside of his run-down little house. He didn't have much, but he always said that was okay. He didn't need much. But we had talked one time about the better-known Bigfoot cases, the one where the miners were trapped, the one where Bauman got kidnapped. He said he believed those stories. Now, no one ever believed his stories, though, except a few of the First Nations peoples he knew. He saw the Patterson-Gimlin film once on television, and he said that was dead on what he saw that day at the river, but the male stood up straighter, taller, and he looked meaner. In my life, I heard 1,000 more stories from him, stories that have nothing at all to do with Sasquatch, stories of gold hunting, big fights with brown bears, how he about froze to death a couple different winters, what he thought the first time he saw an automobile, and electricity, and living through the wars, and then sometimes he would muse about being born under the light of an oil lamp and living to see men walk on the moon. Then he would get all excited, and he would add he couldn't wait to see his great-great-grandchild. But that was not to be. I started this email by telling you about a night that I stopped by with some beer with him to sit and talk. That was the last time that I got to hear those stories from him. I didn't know it that night when I went home. But he did not live to see his great-great-grandchild after all. I went home that night not knowing any of it, and I would never have believed that within just a few short weeks I would be standing graveside at his service. I remember one time he looked at me with something that I now think was a little bit of sadness, and he said, "My boy, when I'm gone, you'll remember nothing of the stories and very little of me. Time will march on. You'll see. We're all just flashes in the pan. Our time on earth here is short. Then it's gone. That's all." Well, here's to you, Grandpa Mort. If I have forgotten anything you ever told me, it was very little. After his grave service, I went home and I started to write down everything I could ever remember that he ever told me. I did that for the next few weeks. Every day I was remembering something else, or I remembered another story he told me. I would talk with the other people in the family, and sometimes they would remember something I had forgotten or never knew, and I would run home and I would write it down in that notebook. In time, it turned out that I was writing less and less in that notebook because there wasn't as much new that I or anyone else remembered. We were writing it all down. I can't tell you how thankful I am that I did that. I had not pulled that notebook out for many, many years, yet I did so during the time of the pandemic. I reread it all, and I was stunned at everything that was there. I had forgotten a lot of it, and as soon as I read it all, I remembered every bit of it. But if I hadn't written it down, it would have been gone forever. He would have been right. So here I am, Nance. I'm 59 years old now, and now my grandbabies are crowding around me, wanting to hear a story. But I don't have many stories. I did not lead an amazing life like Grandpa Mort did. I mean, how exciting is it to tell my kids that I got up and I went to work every day for an accounting firm. Then I got my own title, a desk, and an office. I got another ratchet up on the ladder and a nicer car. What is any of that compared to a life like Grandpa Mort's? So one time I got bold and I told a couple of Grandpa Mort's stories to my 2 oldest grandsons. None of the gory ones, I promise you. Not long after they got home, I got a call from a very unhappy daughter-in-law because now her sons were having nightmares about hairy giants. Well, that was many years ago, and I never again told any of my grandbabies any of those stories. But I'm getting older, and while I'm not as old as Grandpa Mort lived to be, and I reckon I got more than a few years left, I'm beginning to feel my own mortality. I think about him saying that we're all just a flash in the pan, and everything is soon forgotten. I do not want him forgotten, or any of his incredible stories. I believe every single one is true. I know very few people who had the privilege of knowing their great-grandparents, and of those, none of them still had a great-grandparent at 20-something years old. I thank my stars every day that I had him. He walked me through a life that most of us could never dream of. He was, and still is, my hero. Signed, James Fournier, Edmonton, Canada.